Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I wanted to bring to you a brief discussion about the latest article on ancienthistoryx.com regarding this so called Area 51 in Egypt. This moniker, I think, has been around for at least since 2022, but it could have been around for longer. Somebody can correct me on that if they like, but I did point out that it's a recent title because I had not heard necessarily that before until recently. And it involves specifically an area in Egypt that has been cordoned off because it's a military zone. So not only can civilians not go there, but archaeologists and professionals. It is controlled by the government. It is among a pyramid and mastaba complex. It has been researched since the mid 19th century by Carl Lepsis, who did a topographical map of the area. This impression was noted by him in the ground before it was excavated in the early 1900s by Italian archaeologist Alessandro Barsanti. The main point of the recent discussions is what's basically and factually, from what I can tell, a unfinished pyramid. The plates from his published work are remarkable to look at because we're looking at photographs of an excavation taking place in 1904 and 1905. And they're really mystifying. So you can tell how it leads to the intrigue about this site and location, along with the fact that it's now currently off limits. But from everything that I can find is it is simply an unfinished pyramid. Now, I say simply not to minimize it because it is truly remarkable and provides a lot of insight into pyramid building technology or architecture. They have a large descending shaft that leads to a chamber all cut out of the bedrock. This is typical of many pyramids that we see, except we don't have the pyramid on top of it in this case, and we don't have the final form of the shaft. So we can see like the very early stages of how a pyramid was constructed through looking at these excavation photos. One of the more unique features about this unfinished pyramid is there is what looks like a round tub or basin in the bedrock with or should say oval, with an oval sarcophagi lid. Now, one of the things that I speculate is this a clue as to how sarcophagi were placed inside pyramids? Because if you're carving directly out of the bedrock, essentially rock hewn, the remainder of the bottom of the sarcophagi could have just been not completed. If you continue to carve around this, you would have a sarcophagi lying in situ, basically. So that is sort of unique in its own right. We all have this concept of sarcophagi being made individually on the outside and then brought into the pyramid. But what if the sarcophagi were literally carved right directly into the bedrock in place from the beginning? That's something I don't think I've ever heard anyone speculate upon. But as an engineer, when I look at this, I can see that that's basically what they were about to do here. All they needed to do was remove the exterior and the the bedrock around it, and you have a sarcophagi lying in place. Now, as I mentioned, it's a unfinished pyramid in a larger necropolis. There are mastabas and the what's called the layered pyramid in close proximity to it. So this was part of an early dynasty's burial ground for the pharaohs. Now these photos are remarkable that we're able to have these from the early 1900s. You just look at these and you can see how this whole entire thing mystifies, especially being with it off limits to anyone who isn't in the Egyptian military complex. The sad part of what all this is, what I'm reading, is that it is now completely filled in with sand and trash and neglected. Now, I've heard in passing some of the alternative theories about this site, but I just look at it as more so clue as to how ancient Egyptian pyramid architecture was done. We have this early phase left incomplete, and it tells us a lot about how pyramids were built. And it's unfortunate that nobody can get at it. And from what I hear, it's completely filled in with sand and trash at the current time. Um, I try to stay away from too much conspiratorial things. There is really just a sad pragmatic fact about the world where the government deemed this was a military strategic region and it needed to be off limits. And so, therefore, this entire site has been neglected and, from what I understand, fallen in complete disrepair. That's frustrating as someone who is curious about all things ancient Egypt and ancient history. But unfortunately and sadly, it's understandable in the human context. Um, some of the interesting features we can see are the stairs that are present on the left and right hand side of the descending passage. It really deserves a closer look. And all things be as it may, I don't think we're ever going to get there again. So, thankfully, for these people in the mid 19th century and early 20th century, we have their legacy to look back on. Now, it was re-excavated in 50s for a film, and that film is Land of the Pharaohs. And I was really blown away when I watched this film. Whoever was in charge of the art direction and the historical research for this film, they did their homework. Um, it's some of the most accurate depictions of ancient Egypt that I have ever seen, and a lot of people can come and yell at me and disagree with me about the things that are depicted in that film, but my research that I've done over the years shows me that this was one of the most accurate depictions that you'll ever see. Um, I encourage everyone to come and read this article. Not the first article on this site, but I think it lays bare the facts and chews away the esoteric fat. I'd like there to be nothing more than portals and things of that nature. But I try to remain grounded. I will say that, you know, a small part of me believes that the ancient Egyptians could have viewed pyramids as a resurrection machine. And there are sensory deprivation chambers and things like that that we know about that you can get into and get into altered states. So I'm not going to discount those ideas out of whole cloth. So, with that said, you know, they could have had a more intimate knowledge on how to transport the mind into an altered state, which would appear as being transcendent or even argue is transcendent. But I don't know how a corpse would be able to do that. But you could see how possibly if you entered one of these in the living state and got into transcendental consciousness and your mind went to altered states, how you could believe that when you were deceased, your body would travel to the same places. So I'll leave a little bit of room for that as a possibility. Um, and we would only know, I guess, unless we try to replicate it ourselves. But to wrap up, this to me is a remarkable insight onto ancient Egyptian pyramid construction. And I invite any discourse or conversation in regard to any of the things I mentioned. I'm open to new interpretations. I'm someone who relies primarily on the facts. Thank you for your time and hope to see you at ancienthistoryx.com.